These aren't hidden gems or forgotten curiosities. They're the games that entire generations built their taste around. Titles that defined what 2D design could be and set standards that developers are still chasing today. If you grew up with a controller in your hands, at least one of these is the reason why. Super Metroid is a game about atmosphere before it's a game about anything else. Zabes doesn't feel like a video game world. It feels like a place that was dangerous before you arrived and will be dangerous long after you leave. The opening sequence, where you find the last Metroid dead in a space station to a score that sounds like a transmission from a disaster, is still one of the most effective openings in the medium. Nothing is explained. Everything is communicated. The exploration loop is what made the Metroidvania genre a genre. You push until you can't proceed, you backtrack with new tools, and areas you remember from an hour ago reveal exits you never noticed. The world is dense and interconnected in ways that seem impossible given when it was made, and the map system strikes a rare balance. You always know where you are without ever feeling like the game is directing you. That tension between knowing your position and not knowing what to do about it is the whole game. Difficulty is worth addressing honestly. Super Metroid is not a forgiving game, and the control scheme has a learning curve that modern players sometimes don't give themselves time to clear. The wall jumping and shine spark mechanics are optional knowledge that become mandatory in sequence break runs, and discovering them feels more like uncovering a secret than completing a tutorial. What demands, it gives back completely. Mega Man X is the blueprint for how to relaunch a franchise, taking the Mega Man structure and pushing every element. The movement, the difficulty ceiling, the weapon variety, the visual presentation, to a level the NES series hadn't been able to reach. The dash mechanic and wall jump changed how the game felt in your hand from the very first stage, and the charge shot gave combat a rhythm that the classic game's simple buster fire never had. The level design is a masterwork of hidden depth. Every stage contains an upgrade, a heart tank, a sub-tank, or a capsule that rewards thorough exploration without making the main path feel incomplete if you miss them. And the boss order matters in a way that older Mega Man games treated as optional. Getting the right weapon before certain bosses isn't just an advantage. It's the difference between a long fight and a 30-second demonstration. Learning that order is its own layer of the game. Zero's introduction and death in the opening sequence sets a narrative tone that the series maintained for years. The capsule upgrades, especially the helmet that reveals hidden items, are elegant ways to teach secrets through experimentation rather than exposition. Mega Man X has a difficulty that scales correctly, challenging from the first stage, hard by the midpoint, and genuinely punishing at the end without ever feeling unfair about what it's asking from you. A Link to the Past is the game that established what a Zelda game actually was. Ocarina of Time gets the nostalgia and the cultural footprint, but the design language that made that game possible, the dual-world structure, the item-gated exploration, the balance between discovery and direction, was built here first in 1991 on hardware that seemed to have no right producing something this dense and cohesive. The light world and dark world mechanic is one of the best structural ideas in game design. Every area you explore normally has a corrupted mirror version waiting in the dark world, and the relationship between them is used cleverly enough that you're constantly rethinking spaces you thought you understood. Moving between them with a mirror item never stops feeling like accessing somewhere you shouldn't be able to reach, even on a fifth playthrough. The dungeons are the argument for why this game belongs in any serious conversation about design. Each one has a theme, a central mechanic built around the item inside it, and a boss that tests whether you understood the lesson. The puzzle design is consistent and fair. The game never requires information it hasn't given you, and it never assumes knowledge from a previous dungeon that wasn't explicitly provided. That kind of clarity at that scale and complexity is genuinely harder to achieve than it looks from the outside. Sonic 2 is the game that settled the argument. The first Sonic was impressive, but it still felt like Sega proving a concept. The sequel arrived knowing exactly what it was: faster, longer, more confident, and carrying a two-player mode and tales that made it the game kids brought to sleepovers. It became the pack-in title that moved Genesis hardware, which means it was millions of people's first experience with the character. The level design in the early zones is some of the best the series ever produced. Chemical Plant, Casino Night, Mystic Cave. Each one has a distinct visual identity and a mechanical hook that makes speed feel earned rather than automatic. The game understood that Sonic's momentum only feels good when the level is built to give you room to use it, and the best zones here do exactly that. You're not just running through obstacles. You're being funneled through a roller coaster that rewards memorization and punishes impatience. The back half is where it gets complicated. The later zones lose some of that design precision, and Metropolis Zone in particular overstays its welcome in ways that feel like deadline pressure rather than intention. The Death Egg finale is famously brutal without a continue point before it. But the game's influence is almost impossible to overstate. It established the Sonic formula that every subsequent entry spent years trying to recapture, and most of them are still trying. Symphony of the Night changed what Castlevania was, and in doing so changed what a lot of games thought they were allowed to be, taking the tight action platformer structure of the earlier games and replacing it with an open castle to explore RPG stats and gear upgrades that dramatically alter how Alucard plays. It shouldn't have worked as well as it did. But Konami understood that the gothic atmosphere and precise combat didn't need a linear structure to survive the transition. Alucard is one of the most satisfying characters to control in any 2D game. The movement is fluid, the weapon variety is absurd, and the combination of magic spells, familiars, and equipment builds creates a range of possible playstyles that most games with dedicated character creation systems don't match. Finding a new weapon and testing it against enemies you've already beaten. Watching the numbers change, watching the animations land differently. Never loses its pull across the entire game. The inverted castle is where the game goes from great to legendary. Discovering that defeating Richter wasn't the ending, that the castle flips upside down and the difficulty spikes immediately and dramatically. That moment is one of the best reveals in gaming history. It doubles the map, recontextualizes everything you thought you understood about the world, and gives you a final boss that earns its position. Symphony of the Night is twice the game it initially presents itself to be. Street Fighter II didn't invent the fighting game, but it invented the fighting game as a genre. The arcade release in 1991 created lines that hadn't existed in arcades since Pac-Man, and the SNES port in 1992 proved that home consoles could deliver the real experience rather than a degraded approximation. Every fighting game that followed, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, King of Fighters, every one, built its foundation on what this game established. The 8 characters in the original release are individually so well realized that the competitive community spent years drilling deeper into each one. Guile's charge mechanics created a fundamentally different risk-reward calculation than Dalsim's spacing game, which operates by different logic entirely from Zangief's grapple-based pressure. None of that depth was explained. It was discovered through play, through losing, through watching someone else win a way you hadn't considered. What holds up most impressively is the input precision. The game reads your commands at a level that makes every success feel earned and every failure attributable to a specific mistake you made. Competitive fighting games have grown technically complex in ways Street Fighter II never was, but the clarity of the underlying system, the health bars, the timer, the round structure, remains the genre template because nothing has fundamentally improved on it. Super Mario World is the game that made the SNES feel like a generational leap. It launched alongside the console in 1990 and immediately showed what Nintendo could do with more room to breathe. Bigger levels, more varied ideas per world, and a physics system so refined that speedrunners are still finding new routes in it decades later. Nothing felt padded. Every level introduced something and moved on before it wore out its welcome. Yoshi's debut is part of what makes the game so memorable. Riding him changes how you approach obstacles, and different colored Yoshis have different abilities that the game introduces gradually enough that you're always discovering something new. The cape is another example of Nintendo giving you a tool that's simple to understand and years to master. Gliding, running, and the infinite flight trick that technically breaks the intended structure but feels completely intentional once you learn it. The secrets are what pushed it beyond a great platformer into something people are still exploring. Star Road, the special world, the alternate exits hidden behind challenges that predate the Kaizo genre as a concept. Super Mario World rewards obsession in a way that most games don't bother with. The completionist path and the casual path share the same world, but almost feel like different games depending on how deep you're willing to go. Finishing the main story felt, the first time through, like reading only the first chapter of something much longer. Donkey Kong Country arrived in 1994 and caused a genuine panic at Nintendo's competitors. Rare's pre-rendered 3D graphics running on SNES hardware looked like something that shouldn't have been possible, and the game knew it. Sony and Sega both had to respond to marketing that made their hardware look technically behind a console that was several years old. The visual impact was real and immediate, and it moved millions of copies on its own. The game underneath the presentation holds up just as well. Rare understood that momentum is its own reward in a platformer, and the levels are built to give you long stretches where everything flows correctly before they take it away with a section that demands precision. Animal buddies like Rambi and Ingard change the feel of movement in ways that keep the game from settling into routine. The minecart and roller coaster levels were set pieces that nothing else on the system was doing at the time. Two-player cooperative play was also genuinely functional, which was rare. Most co-op platformers of the era had the second player waiting to take over rather than both players contributing simultaneously. The tag system meant you could actually share a run rather than take turns being sidelined. Donkey Kong Country didn't just succeed by looking impressive. It backed the presentation with level design that would have sold the game without a single screenshot. Earthbound is not interested in being a conventional RPG. The menu art is crayon. The enemies are abstract, new age imagery, and urban paranoia. The final boss is a cosmic horror that the game asks you to fight with prayer rather than weapons. Nothing about it conforms to what JRPG design was doing in 1994, and that commitment to its own strangeness is what made it a cult classic before cult classic meant anything. Ness and his friends fight with baseball bats and psychic powers in American suburbs, department stores, and literal art installations. The comedy is deadpan in a way that reads more like Vonnegut than Nintendo, but the game earns its emotional moments precisely because of that contrast. The sequence at Magicant, where Ness confronts his own fears and the music and visuals strip away everything comfortable about the game's tone, arrives like a gut punch because nothing before it prepared you for it. The rolling HP counter is one of the best mechanical ideas in RPG history. Damage gets subtracted gradually rather than instantly, meaning a killing blow gives you a window to heal before the number reaches 0. It creates tension in every major fight and makes status effects genuinely terrifying. Earthbound is a game people remember for its personality, but the systems underneath that personality are quietly excellent. It's stranger and smarter than it has any right to be. Final Fantasy VI is the game where Square proved that a cast of 14 characters didn't have to mean 14 shallow archetypes. Each character has a personal arc that intersects with the others in ways that feel earned rather than arranged. The opera scene, Cyan's grief at Doma, seals his attempt in the world of ruin. These are moments that committed to emotional reality in a way that JRPG storytelling rarely had before. Kefka is what makes the second half of the game work. An antagonist who actually wins, who destroys the world and rules over its ruins, was unprecedented in mainstream RPGs. The shift from the Imperial War narrative of the first half to the survival story of the world of Ruin is structurally bold, and the game earns the tonal shift because every character's response to catastrophe reveals something specific about who they are. The combat layer gets undervalued in conversations about Final Fantasy VI. The Esper system, where you equip magical summons to teach characters spells and permanently raise their stats, creates a customization freedom that most party-based RPGs restrict. Every character can technically learn everything, but the rate at which they learn creates soft specializations that reward investing in a roster you actually care about. Final Fantasy VI reached the ceiling of what 16-bit storytelling could do, and then went further. Chrono Trigger is the product of a collaboration that couldn't be replicated, while Squaresoft was at the height of its technical and creative powers. The game feels like the result of people pushing each other to be better, rather than any single vision executed in isolation. The active time battle system here is the best version Square ever built. Dual and triple techs that combine party abilities into unique attacks give you reasons to experiment with compositions beyond raw statistics. Because the game never becomes a numbers grind, combat stays engaging from the opening to the final boss. You're never fighting to level. You're fighting to see what the next tech combination looks like and whether it changes how you approach the next encounter. Multiple endings and New Game Plus were revelations in 1995, but what actually keeps people coming back is the writing. Every playable character has a complete arc. The time travel mechanics respect their own internal logic, which is rarer in narrative games than it should be. The ending you reach feels earned regardless of which one you unlock. Chrono Trigger is the rare game where ambition and execution landed in exactly the same place at exactly the same time, built by a team that never quite fully assembled again after it.